Hey everybody, Chris Peters from FloHockey here, and we have breaking news, and it is big. It is potentially seismic. It is potentially earth-shattering to the developmental landscape of all of hockey, and the ruling is in. The NCAA Division I Council has adopted a new rule that would allow players to participate, hockey players to participate in professional activities prior to enrollment. So, what does that mean? And this is for men's hockey. This is a very interesting ruling, as essentially how it impacts hockey is that this will now allow players from the Canadian Hockey League, Major Junior in Canada, the leagues OHL, WHL, QMJHL, to all become eligible for the NCAA. Currently, they are not eligible. They are considered professionals because there are players that play with NHL contracts in that league. However, that ruling is changing. This is coming in line with other sports in the NCAA. So that is why this ruling is happening. There are a number of challenges that the NCAA has faced on amateurism, on antitrust laws, on a number of other things. And they were facing a lawsuit regarding eligibility of CHL players. However, this basically cuts that off at the pass. This is now opening the door for players in the major junior ranks to come to college hockey. So there's a lot of things to break down. There are a lot of knowns and there are a lot of unknowns, probably more unknowns than knowns at this point. But let's go to the knowns. What we do know is that this rule will go into effect on August 1st, 2025. So that means none of the CHL players will be eligible until next fall. Players that the ruling also says that players that are receive anything more than necessary expenses would not be eligible. So basically, if you are under an NHL contract and you are receiving payment or anything like that, you would not be able to join an NCAA program. Also, NCAA still has their academic standards, which still need to be upheld in order to gain enrollment into the university. So that's one known. Another known is that basically this was going to happen. I think everybody kind of knew that. The question now and the unknowns that start to unfurl from this is what comes next. And as I mentioned, this could be a seismic shift. As things stand right now, there are basically two different sets of rules governing players, even within the NHL's own collective bargaining agreement, governing players in the CHL and the NCAA. There's a different timeline in terms of when they have to be signed after their draft year. There's different ways that players can retain rights or have their rights relinquished or become free agents. There's all sorts of different things. That, as of right now, will not change. However, the NHL and the NHLPA will be going into a negotiating period very soon in terms of how the CBA will change. And this obviously will be part of that discussion because this is a pretty significant thing. What are the benefits of this rule? For number one, the players are going to benefit because now those players that are high level players that have a choice, either major, junior, or college hockey, they don't have to make that decision at 16 anymore, at least not on the surface. There's a couple of complicating factors that we'll get to in a minute. But essentially, they're not losing their eligibility. This is really helpful for those players that went to a training camp in the CHL and ultimately didn't make the team, yet because they played in 2 preseason games, their NCAA eligibility is gone and they can't get it back. That's really what started that lawsuit that we mentioned a little bit ago that was brought in Western New York. So there's a lot of things there that helps those players. They don't have to make this career-altering, life-altering decision at 15 or 16. They can make it later and still have options. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is that the CHL, I don't think that we're just going to see a free flow of players between the two options. For years, players could go one way. They just couldn't come back if it went that way. So what we're seeing now, and again, try to follow along because this is a very winding, complicated thing. But what we're seeing now is, the CHL does have player agreements in place. They're essentially contracts. How enforceable that will be, what ramifications there would be should a player break such a contract, that is what remains to be seen. The CHL feels like they're in a very good position to retain players from the ages of 16 to 19 and then allow those players to go forward into college after that. Well, when you think about the types of players that we're talking about here, those 18 and 19-year-old players, some of them are ready to make that jump to pro hockey. So whether or not those players ever come to the NCAA remains to be seen. Another bit of an unknown here is essentially how who this is going to impact negatively. The player pool is deepening as a result of this. Players now, the NCAA schools have a larger pool of players to select from. Is that going to push out players that already have verbal commitments to colleges? Is this going to push players that, were kind of on the cusp, or, however many of these players walk on? And that's really where I'm very intrigued to see what happens, because there will be winners and there will be losers, as there so often is. You just hate if it's going to be athletes that already seem to have things in place. The good news is there are other options for those players, but it's not NCAA Division I, which for many kids in the United States in particular is a dream and a goal. So that's something to keep in mind. If that happens, that could help NCAA Division III. That could help the ACHA. How does it impact Canadian youth sports? That's another thing that we're trying to figure out. And really, they're trying to figure it out as well. They pull many of their players from the CHL already. So that is something where all of a sudden you're competing for the players that basically only had one option if they did not sign a pro contract afterwards. So that's another thing to kind of take into account. The other leagues that will be impacted by this decision, those leagues that are not major junior leagues but are major feeders to the NCAA. We're talking USHL, BCHL, OJHL, the entire suite of CJHL leagues, the North American Hockey League, the USPHL, all of these other leagues that do send players to college hockey. Now you have a new option for players. So, let's take a look at, we're just going to use Macklin Celebrini as the example here. He chooses to go the college route early in his career. He goes to Shattuck St. Mary's. He's tendered by the Chicago Steel in the USHL, and he plays in the USHL, accelerates his schooling, goes to Boston University a year early, plays at BU at 17 years old, is drafted first overall, now under contract with the San Jose Sharks. Now, he would have been in the WHL footprint. He was drafted in the WHL. It would have been an option for him. Now, let's say he does want to stay on the college track. Well, he could have gone to Shattuck St. Mary's, could have gone to the WHL, and then would there have been an option for him to go to Boston University at 17 years old? That's going to be the kind of player that really we're talking about here. Does that impact that player? Adam Fantilli, Owen Power, other Canadian players that chose to go to the USHL because they felt they wanted a more competitive environment, but also retaining their NCAA eligibility. They gave, Power and Fantilli gave up options in the OHL to stay closer to home. And a big reason for it is they wanted to play the college game. They wanted to go to the NCAA. So that's the thing. That choice still exists for players. That's a very important thing. For some players, their preference is going to be to play college hockey. For some players, their preference is going to be to play major junior hockey. That will still exist, and that will still be options for those players. But it's for those guys that maybe chose major junior. It didn't work out on a pro hockey basis. Now they have another option available to them. So what do I think will happen? I think this is all opinion at this point. This is, and much of what we're talking about is speculation, because I think it is going to take years for us to figure out exactly what's happening here. But let's talk about some of the key things that I think, in terms of my opinion. I do think that the CHL is going to be able to consolidate more talent this way. They're not going to have as many players that, are afraid of that losing their NCAA eligibility. So I think you could see the CHL get younger as a result. I think that it could impact, the number of players that are going to traditional college feeder leagues at this point. And the top end players may choose to go to other places. The OHL has a large collection of talent. They have many NHL draft picks. They have guys that are first rounders. They have players that are playing in their 18 and 19-year-old season that are going to be in the NHL as soon as next year. And so there is a large clump of players that's going to be very attractive to play with and against. And in that league in particular, certainly in the WHL, the QMJHL, and others. But the USHL has some of that too. And so they will try to keep that. talking to people around junior hockey leagues, we're talking CHL, we're talking USHL, we're talking CJHL, BCHL, everywhere else, there is a lot of unknown and there's a lot of uncertainty and there's a lot of concern because nobody really knows what's going to happen. I'll tell you who probably plays the biggest role in this whole thing. It's the agents. The agents and family advisors, the people that are going to be helping players through this path. And so I think they will play the biggest role in how this plays out because they will be the ones directing players what is best for their development. Players will have to make their own choices ultimately. But I do think that the influence of agents and family advisors is going to be a significant factor because they're going to be talking about things like what is your best option for extending your career? What is your best option for getting to the NHL as soon as possible? What is your best option for earning a pro contract? And so there's a lot of different things that go there. I think also for players, this is going to extend the career of several players that otherwise probably get overlooked. The NCAA continues to be a route that is heavily scouted both for the NHL draft and for college free agents. It's more heavily scouted than some of the other options that these players have post-playing career. Some of them might go to the ECHL, some of them may go to U Sports, some may go other places. The NCAA could afford them the opportunity as free agents to extend their career, get more looks, prove themselves further, and get an opportunity at the NHL. So there's a lot of potential benefits here for the players themselves. But I will say this all of this is happening with one warning. Anybody that doesn't adapt quickly enough to this, that doesn't come to accept it and enact what needs to be enacted to stay ahead of the game here, you will be left behind. That's the thing. Innovation, understanding, making things improve. I think there's a lot of change coming that's beyond this rule. Maybe it's leagues linking up. Maybe it's mergers. Maybe it's different things. There are a lot of different things. But if these leagues, these teams, these players, these coaches, if they are not adapting to what is happening, they will be left behind. And that is going to be a very challenging thing to deal with. So it is going to be a lot of uncertainty, a lot of lack of clarity at this point. But what we do know now is that players have more options than they've ever had before. This rule opens things up. The winners are most of the players, but not all of them. And there's really no set thing that would ever please everybody. That's just the way the world works at this point. But that's how it's going to be. This is a big moment. Make no mistake. This is a big moment in the history of hockey because there is going to be change in how the game is developed, how the path to the NHL works. And it very well could change things like draft age. It could change things like what leagues are where and who's competing for the Memorial Cup and all of these different things that are coming. A lot of it is all speculation right now, and it is probably going to take years for us to figure this out. But this is a day that will definitely go down as one of the biggest in the history of NCAA junior hockey because this is a game changer in so many different ways.